Con ustedes, Cindy Carter, Field CISO West and Central Americas de Checkpoint.
Hola, buenos días. Me llamo Cindy Carter. I'm a Field CISO with Checkpoint Software Technologies. Estoy agradecido de estar aquí. So to put a little bit of structure around today's topic, I always like to make sure that we have an agenda. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to my journey in cybersecurity. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the state of cybersecurity worldwide, some of the challenges that we're having and how Checkpoint can help address some of those. And then I'm going to bring in some bits of inspiration for you CISOs and security practitioners out there. And then we'll do a bit of a wrap up at the end. My instructions for delivering this keynote message was to focus on these items. And I really did a lot of introspection when it came to the inspirational part. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I did putting it together for you. So without further ado, a little bit about me. I'll save you some time in social engineering me. I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, also known as the Motor City capital of the world. But before I even had my sights set on a career in IT or cybersecurity, I was actually an Olympic hopeful. I was a figure skater. I still am. I still do compete competitively on a synchronized skating team. But as a young girl growing up in Michigan with an ice rink on almost every corner, I fell in love with hearing the crunch of the ice beneath my blade and the feel of the wind in the ice from the ice rink in my hair as I stroked across the ice. I really was training hard to be an Olympic hopeful to the point of skating almost 6 hours a day, every day after school. Now, of course, the Olympics are a tough game to get into. And so reality set in and I began my education after high school, but I still skated, as I mentioned before, and I still skate today. It's a big part of what I do to stay healthy and to stay active. I started my career, actually, my college career in medicine. I was pre-med. My mother was a nurse. My father worked at IBM. I was very positively influenced by both of those. And really, my father was able to take me to work with him. So I got to play on the computers a little bit more. And my mom, of course, could not take me to work with her. So during my second year, my sophomore year of college, I made the decision instead of pre-med to get a career or a degree rather in information systems or information technology. So that's a little bit about my journey in IT. And then, of course, as we go through our lives, as many of us have, some of us obtained a degree and ended up doing something completely differently. I stayed the path with IT for several years, but then, lo and behold, there was this journey into cybersecurity that I found myself doing as a software developer, working with our software engineering teams to build in DevSecOps. I know some of you have heard that term before. It's really all about making sure that in addition to all of the protocols that go into securing a network and securing devices, it's also about securing the software. So that resonated with me. I spent a few years building application security practices and working across the organization in that fashion. And as part of my journey, I also found myself working quite a bit in the healthcare space, whether it was on the payer side, so the insurance companies, or on the provider side for the hospital institutions that were providing the care, and also even for the healthcare IT companies, such as software engineering organizations and such that were providing solutions and services to those healthcare entities. And that's where the intersection of my pre-med self and my IT self sort of came together. And I've really enjoyed probably the last 15 years of my career dedicated into the healthcare space. And at the end of the day, when you really stop to think about it, the medical record is one of the most uniquely identifiable pieces of information about a human being that there is, other than their own fingerprint. And so when all of that data is contextualized around a human being, and you think about securing and protecting the privacy and security of that data or of that medical record, it's really human lives at stake. And that's where I found my purpose to be very deeply rooted in human safety and really making a difference in the cyber world. Now, moving along a little bit here to talk about some current industry specifics. And I always like to use a little bit of movie quotes or TV quotes. And if any of you remember the TV show Friends, and there was a character there called Joey, and he would say, "How you doing?" Well, and I always feel like whenever we're all together, whether it's on a webinar or whether we're starting to see each other in person, we sort of look around the room and say, "How are you doing?" Because everybody has had this monumental year and a half, we'll call it, of not only cybersecurity events everywhere, but we've had a global pandemic as well. Everybody knows that. And there are so many parallels to the global pandemic and cybersecurity that I'm not going to get into here, but we are going to talk a little bit rather, about some of the current state of things, some of the areas where Check Point is able to provide some solutions and services around that and offer some excellence in that regard. And then I'm going to go into a little bit of the research as well. As we all know, there's a headline nearly every day in the news about a cyber-related event or some of the latest breaches that are out there, and the statistics are absolutely compelling, to say the least. And the numbers can absolutely speak for themselves, but you'll see as I get on further in the slides here that I decided to do a little bit of research on my own and conduct a few interviews. So we'll get onto that here in just a moment. But here's some of the quotes that you'll see that either pop up on the headlines, or you may be reading them in some of the news articles that you have. And this one from Forbes really resonated with me. The largest cyber attack in history. When we all think of Colonial Pipeline, or we think of what happened with SolarWinds, we were thinking at the time that those were the largest cyber attacks in history. And right now they probably are, but there's likely going to be more. And we all know that. The World Economic Forum, absolutely. This was the parallelisms to the pandemic that I made earlier. We need to prepare for a global cyber pandemic. So why am I saying all of this? I'm not trying to, as they say in another movie, describe the water. We all know what that feels like. We all know what it feels like to be somewhat drowning. There's a few more statistics here that I'll offer up that Check Point just pulled together, actually as of June of 2021 this year, and just the sheer amount of increase in the cyber attacks in only 1 month that this shows. So again, the attackers are getting swifter, they're getting smarter, and I really do feel that we have the ability to do the same thing. There's another statistic here that Check Point Research provided around malicious files and the presence of those every day for companies with at least 1,000 users that are active. So again, you understand the points here. Like I said, the numbers speak to themselves. But I also like to focus on where we have some opportunity here. And really, no cybersecurity presentation would be complete without a Sun Tzu quote. This is the only one that's in there, I promise. But I do like this one because we are in a bit of chaos. The industry itself feels like it could be in a bit of a chaotic state. And really, there is opportunity. And there are smart people in the audience here, listening in from wherever you may be. And I know that together is better, and this is how some of this is going to happen. But let's talk a little bit about some of these interviews that I had. So this is essentially how the users feel about their experience with security, right? We're either forcing it upon them without providing them the necessary relevancy around why security is important. And this was absolutely a theme that they all continue to feel, even as they're working remotely in their homes and trying to gain access to the things that they need to do their jobs. These smart fellows here, well, they provided some sage advice. And I'm not going to go into details around cloud security here, but I do want to talk about the fact that cloud security and if and when your journey does take your business to the cloud, is a shared responsibility. And many of the cloud providers are investing significantly in security, because otherwise they wouldn't be in business either. But it doesn't mean that security is guaranteed. As I mentioned before, it's a shared responsibility. And the biggest risk that we have for breaches in the cloud are misconfigurations of the cloud service itself. So those are some of the things that you have to make sure that you're keeping in mind when it comes to your cloud security strategy. You want to make sure that that you're not just taking your applications or your capabilities and just putting them into the cloud. You do have to step back. You have to re-architect a little bit. You have to make sure that you're building security into instead of bolting it on, because otherwise it just won't work. Now here's another interesting candidate here. Get to know who you're dealing with. If you've got software developers in your organization, or you leverage third-party software development, I worked at a company where, as I mentioned before, application security was a big part of the security practice that I helped to implement. And at the time, the software developers or software engineers, however the title is in your organization, they wanted absolutely nothing to do with the security team, because there's a perception that security is going to slow them down. And when you think in terms of things like DevSecOps, and you think in terms of companies that are following agile practices in their software development, they want to make sure that they're delivering value to the client, or delivering value on those products within a sprint cycle of anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 to 4 weeks, whatever makes sense to them. And those are the types of things that you have to consider when you're talking about whether you're using software from a third party or your company is developing software itself. What level of experience or knowledge do your software developers have about secure coding best practices? What are some of those things that you're doing in order to enable your software developers to write secure code and ensure that they're doing the best that they can to, again, build security into instead of bolting it on at the end of the software development lifecycle? And then finally, there's this conversation that the CISO has with the board of directors. And this can sometimes be what it feels like to be in my shoes. And when you're talking with your executive team or even your board of directors, on the surface, they're going to tell you, well, we don't want to get breached. Well, no one wants to get breached. There's no guarantee that that's not going to happen, though. And they may appear to be supportive of your cybersecurity budget that you've presented to them. But really, underneath the surface, sometimes this is what I think they're thinking. And you have to make some really bold decisions. And I'll cover some of that in a little bit here about how to get past this. And then finally, there's another aspect here as well. Security teams in general. Not only can they not scale, there's not enough security talent in the industry to fill all of the open positions that there are right now at companies. Many of you already know this. You're having trouble hiring security analysts, or security architects, or even folks in the governance, risk, and compliance space. And so this stretches your security team even further. And that adds an overwhelming amount of burnout and fatigue on your team. And well, this is sometimes how the security team feels about it at the end of the day. Okay, so those were the interviews that I held. We're going to talk a little bit about cyber risk. Again, this is one of those topics that you have very often around your conversations with your executives, your C-suite, your boards of directors, and really what you need to make sure that you help them understand is cyber risk, or rather, I apologize, business risk is something that those boards of directors are very used to dealing with. They're very quantifiable, right? It's a gain or it's a loss. It's an asset or it's a liability. And those types of business risk, when it comes to analyzing where they're going to put their budget dollars, are a little bit easier for them to do. But when you're talking about cybersecurity risk, there's things such as, well, there's different aspects to it. There's third-party risk. There's risk that we have that we inherit, or that we need to make sure that we're providing awareness to when it comes to third parties that our business will be interacting with. There's also going to be an inherent risk based on where we're leveraging our technology capabilities. Back several years ago, there was the thought, when you're bringing a new security capability in, to choose that best of breed type of an aspect. And while that may have had merit in 10 years ago, even 7, 8 years ago, as cybersecurity practices were being built and there were specialty products and solutions and things like that, you still had to hire at least one person for each new technology that you acquired. And so now we're stepping back saying, well, we need to have a cohesive platform that we can manage our security practice from. And if we don't do that, we're creating an element of cyber risk, because we're creating blind spots, because we can't all be hands on the keyboard, eyes on the screen for each and every single item that we have in our practice. So you need to help them understand, where does the investment need to happen? And of course, again, there's an acceptable level of risk that your organization knows what it has. They just don't maybe know how to tell you what it is. And you as security leaders and security practitioners are challenged to make sure that you're able to communicate cyber risk in business terms, not in technical terms. That is one of the key things that I've received from several boards of directors that I've spoken with, and even your peers in the C-suite. We tend, as cyber practitioners, to always want to go to the bits and bytes of a conversation, to talk about how the latest endpoint protection is going to work and function. But you need to bubble that conversation up a little bit higher so that they can understand exactly, how is this protecting our organization? How does this reduce our risk? And you need to be able to show conversations in that regard. So with that in mind, we do have a video to show.
Remember before all this started, when you kept your corporate data closely guarded? On site. Now all your data is everywhere. In homes, in cafes, in parks, in cars. When your employees are working from everywhere, you know what else needs to be? Your cybersecurity. Checkpoint. Secure your everything. Checkpoint.com/new normal.
And then from that video, you will see that one of the things that is a resonating topic with our cybersecurity practices, especially with Checkpoint, is prevention. So we're focusing on preventative measures now in the cybersecurity practice. You still do need to have a level of detection. You have to be able to make sure that you're getting those alerts and things like that. But now that there is a renewed focus, I will say, on prevention and dare I say, there's another term out there, resilience. How do you build resilience into your cybersecurity practice? And so we're going to talk about that in just a moment. So in other words, as we've said, right, once malware is inside, it's already too late. So how do you prevent that? If you detect it, you may have already lost. So you want to make sure that you're focusing on prevention and not just detection. So these are the four terms that I shared at the very beginning of slide one, actually. And these are four words that I have leveraged as far as my work as a CISO and also my work in cybersecurity in general. And it's just four simple words. It's agile, adaptive, resilient, and bold. And I'm going to share with you some stories about how each one of these has played into the security practices that I've led and what the outcomes were. So I like to provide a little bit of a quote or a little bit of a memory marker there for you. So this is Agile principle number one. And it's all about the continuous delivery of value. And what I did at one of the organizations that I worked with was we had a very limited security team, as many of you do, but we had a huge list of projects that we had to implement. And so I started to take a look at the DevSecOps principles. Excuse me. I started to take a look at the DevSecOps principles and what we as an organization, a security organization, could glean from that. And what I mean by that is you look at the software development lifecycle in an agile framework, and they're delivering value every couple of weeks. Those sprint cycles are such that even though they may have a very long vision project ahead of them, they deliver value on that project every 2 weeks. So with that in mind, we took that DevSecOps example of the software development organization and brought it over to the security team. We took every single one of our projects that we had in the security team, whether it was a governance, risk, and compliance initiative, like an audit or a regulatory assessment. We even took some of our architecture and engineering projects to work with some of the parts of the organization that were bringing in new products for us to work with, making sure that their minimum security baselines were sound in order for us to be able to work together, looking at the cloud security strategy as well as an architect. And then even right over to our security operations, where we were looking at vulnerability management practices or threat intelligence practices. So each one of those was its own individual project within the security team. And again, there weren't an unlimited amount of resources to execute on those projects. So what we did collectively is those folks that were aligned with those various practices within security started working in an agile format. And we developed daily stand-ups. We adopted a bit of a Scrum atmosphere. We wanted to make sure that we were collectively talking about the things that we worked on yesterday, the things that we need to work on today, and where you might need help or where there's a roadblock, so that we could continue in an agile fashion to deliver value on each of those security projects every 2 weeks. And within the first year of us doing that, we were able to demonstrate and show that all of that, where we had started from a baseline of 0 on some things, how much we had added value and how much we had grown the security space for whichever one of those practices was. So you can build agile practices into the security team without it really having to be strictly agile or strictly Scrum, but you can take some of those principles and adopt them the way that we did. The other word that I like to share here is adaptive. And another word for that might be flexible. This quote here, I really enjoy that because it's really all about success. And at the end of the day, that's what we're all really hoping to achieve as well, is success in our security practices. And I'm gonna step back for a minute and talk in terms of what might be considered an older cybersecurity framework or methodology, and that's the term defense in depth. Now, some people may say, well, yeah, that worked out great when you had everything was on premises, everything was in your data center, your employees were sitting directly in your office, directly connected to your network, et cetera, et cetera. But a modern defense in depth approach can also be created now, and that is how we've remained adaptive. So when I mentioned the word earlier about being more preventative focused, that is where cybersecurity practices have also adapted over time. Because when you start to think in terms of layering on those defenses, or as I mentioned earlier, building security into everything we do instead of bolting it on. And I'll give an example. In the software development lifecycle, again, it's just an easy one, and hopefully it resonates for a few folks here as well. But not only when you're developing the software and writing the code and helping the software developers with whatever your static code analysis tool might be, you check in your code, whatever product you're using will return the errors that you might have in your code that present vulnerabilities. And some of these really smart tools will even tell you exactly how to go fix that line of code. But this was even looking further back in the development lifecycle, in the SDLC, or the software development lifecycle, as we say, and starting to take a look at what does a product look like when it's just a twinkle in a product manager's eye? What is it that we're going to consider from a design and an architecture perspective when it comes to creating that piece of software or creating that overall product? And when you start to open up everybody's eyes to that, and by the way, that wasn't just the product folks, that wasn't just the product designers or the product managers, that was involving everybody that was part of the secure software development lifecycle. It was those product folks, those solution managers or solution designers, if you will, the software engineers or software developers, the quality assurance testers. It was everybody, getting them in the same room together at the same time, and really talking about, let's use a dry erase board and talk about this product or this software, and where does the data come from? Where is it going to? Who will have access to this data along this data workflow? Is this data encrypted or unencrypted, at rest or in transit? What type of data is it? And those are that is the adaptive way of thinking that you can then start to bring about a movement of building security into everything you do instead of bolting it on. So that is just one quick example. Another way that I'll share with you, and this was very much, it goes along the same lines of this, but it's really about the culture. So, and this was a very non-technical way of bringing an adaptive mindset to our cybersecurity practice. And one of the things that we did at the very beginning, or one of the things rather that I had done as the leader of that particular team, is I surveyed the organization to really to try to get an understanding of how secure-minded are the employees that work here. Do they even understand what a phishing email looks like, or are they just getting that from the annual compliance training that they have to do? Do they understand the risk of door drafting when we were in the offices, and you might want to do the right thing and help somebody who might be carrying in a large load of items on their arms, but you also need to make sure that they're properly authenticating for that access and just scanning their badges on the access reader. So simple things like that are what really help to open people's eyes up to how security is really everybody's responsibility. And I leveraged the onboarding training that our new employees always had to sit through. You get all of that good information at you, right? You get your human resources pieces of information, your benefits, your paycheck, which is the reason that you're there. But then in comes the security team, and it used to just be this 5-minute recording. And I said, no. I want to be in front of those new hires. And one of the things that I said to them when I walked into the room is I said, "Welcome to the security team." And their eyes got big and they sort of looked around like, did I apply for the wrong job description? And really, that's where I was able to tell them that they are an extension of the security team, and that it was that was a major step in creating a culture of secure-mindedness across the organization. They really bought into the things that the security team were doing to help keep them and our company's data safe. Okay, so on to the next word. This is another favorite of mine as well. This is the third word in the mix, and it's resilient. And when you stop to think about resilient, I mentioned the term prevention earlier. I like to think of this as proactive instead of reactive. But really, when you're building resiliency into your cybersecurity practices, I'm going to go back to that defense in depth, that modern defense in depth conversation, because every step along the way, whether you're securing your endpoints or you're securing your APIs that you're using to communicate cloud to on-prem, whatever the case may be, you're writing scripts that are going to be running for some of your corporate applications, whatever that looks like for you. Building the security into each layer of those is how you're going to build the most resilience against a cyber attack. And there are absolutely ways that you can do that. I already mentioned some of the work that we did around the software development lifecycle to help build security into. So by backing up the software development into the solution design phase and really sitting down and having that data flow discussion, even with the software developers in the room. And then more importantly, I'll use this term, you all know it, threat modeling. That is exactly what helped to build resilience into our software and into our products, so that when we turned it over to the quality assurance testers and they ran their dynamic testing, sure, they might have found some different types of vulnerabilities with different context and things like that, as well as different access points that they were looking at. But it also helped to bolster the strength of the software in being able to withstand a cyber attack. So those are some of the things that you want to make sure that you're keeping in mind. Even when it comes to there's another term out there that people talk about, vigilance versus diligence. Well, vigilance is all about being on the alert. So that's the detection side of things, being on the alert, being aware, making sure that you can see what's coming, or that you know what's coming or what may have come. The other aspect of it is the diligence part, right? And that's the determination or the perseverance when you're doing something. And that's the determination around building security in, or as I like to also call it, secure from the start. And finally, the last word here, and this was one that really is where you may have heard the term where the rubber meets the road. This is one element of inspiration as a CISO and also as a security practitioner that was probably the most difficult for me to embrace. As a servant leader, as someone who wants to make sure that I'm empowering and I'm doing everything that I can to support the team that's doing everything that they can to protect the organization. There are some times when you do have to make a bold move or a bold statement. And one of the examples that I had here was as we were establishing some of the security architecture and actually looking at some third-party risk management. And at one of the institutions I was working for, they wanted to use a health information exchange. And it was a cloud-based solution, semi-cloud, I'll call it, with a health information exchange and with this particular vendor. And one of the things that we did from a security architecture perspective, and our governance, risk, and compliance team also looked at, well, do they have some minimum security baselines for how they've developed this HIE? And they were unable to produce those over time, And we try to ask our questions different ways. Well, just give us what some of your basic secure coding best practices are. Do you follow? Do you know what the OWASP top 10 is, and how do you code for that? Or what from the Cloud Security Alliance principles have you adopted for your cloud strategy? We asked some very simple questions. We had some cyber risk assessments, of course, that we were conducting. And this organization, for whatever reason, could not answer our questions to our satisfaction. And I was getting a lot of pressure from our C-suite. In fact, our another type of a CIO, the Chief Innovation Officer. So this was all about growth. This was all about taking steps, boldly going where we had never gone before as a company. It was a little bit about the company rebranding itself into a new place. So yes, they were being very bold about some of the steps that they wanted to take for growth. But then I had to make a very bold statement. And at the end of all of this, with this health information exchange, it was sort of a toe-to-toe meeting. And finally, after I explained the risks that we were having with not getting an acceptable level of understanding what their minimum security baselines were, and you're talking about us wanting to share all of this protected health information with this institution, not only does that violate some of the contracts that we have in place, but think of the privacy fallout that could happen with that if something were to happen. And so finally I said, okay, you know what? I give up. How about we do this? We'll bring them in and we're going to conduct a pilot, and I'm going to take your family's medical information, and that's the data that we're going to run through on that pilot. And that Chief Innovation Officer sat there for a minute and said, you made your point. I don't want my family's data in there if you don't feel that we can trust the security platform that this HIE is built upon. So be bold out there, cyber folks. Believe in yourselves. And when you have to have that moment of being bold, remember, you have the right information, and being able to communicate that and think about how you can help the C-suite or help those users understand why this may not be the best decision that we're making from a cybersecurity perspective. That's exactly where it went. I made it personal, right? That's what I did. I made it personal for that person. And once I said, let's just put your information in there, it was all bets are off. So it's never too late to do the right thing. I like to say that also. Okay, everyone. So back to, those were your 4 words of inspiration. And just back real quick to a couple of points here to make around the reference that I made to the cyber pandemic earlier. Or we have to adapt security to those types of aspects here that we're all seeing shifting in the industry. Vaccination, as we've learned, and this is not a political statement by no means, but vaccination is way better than treatment. It's way better than some of the alternatives that are out there. So that is absolutely one thing that we learned from the pandemic. We want to make sure that you're being able to focus on that real-time prevention aspect of it. Securing your everything, that's a statement that I love that Checkpoint likes to use. But really, it's every part in the chain, or every part in the defense in depth model matters. This new normal that we're in, it's going to require that we've got relevance and practicality in our networks infrastructures, in our processes. Compliance plays into that as well. And then all of those interconnected devices. We want the Internet of Things to not become the Internet of Threats. We want to make sure that there's things that we can do to secure those workloads, and that we're addressing those appropriately. The other thing, right, consolidation and visibility. I mentioned that before. Going from best of breed to a single operating platform, it helps eliminate some of those blind spots that you can have. Again, if unless you have an unlimited budget and unlimited talent pool to draw upon, you need to make sure that your security capabilities, your security tools are simple, they're easy to operate, that they're integrated with each other. And from that, you're going to be able to obtain the best protection. So I'm going to wrap up with you here on that. I've provided some references here for some of the information that I've shared with you today, other than my personal stories there. Please do check those out. I will be able to share these slides with the MAPS group here after the event, so you'll be able to have those links. And I also wanted to say, muchas gracias, saludos. Thank you so very much for having me with you today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Agradecemos a Cindy Carter por su participación en el IT Solutions Day.